It's 11:59 at Radio Free America. This is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I've got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
And welcome everybody to our Daily Gun Show. We come to you live every weeknight at midnight Eastern, and we talk about guns for an hour. And it's Monday, and it's episode 786. So every so often I like to give people an idea of what we're doing out here. It's for 786 episodes. It's changed a bit over the years literally, 700 episodes. But one thing's remained consistent, and a couple of things I guess have remained consistent. The first being that we are not here to amplify the message from mainstream, old-fashioned, traditional media or the sources that pull those strings. This is a show that goes on every single night for the last 700, going on 800 episodes, to resist that and to encourage and to support those who want to add their own voice to the collective collaboration, to the effective accumulation of data, especially that stuff that focuses on our Second Amendment, protected rights, and firearms. So this is not a forum to get together and chat about the news of the day. Sometimes as a panel discussion, it can tend to go that way, but the goal would be to fight that, to resist that tendency to do what the agenda-based means of information flow out there is focusing on, and to give a place for us to gather and to have a conversation. And when I say we, I mean the people that are participating in this on both sides of the microphones and speakers. This isn't old-fashioned radio. This isn't an old-fashioned television show. It certainly is not an old-fashioned newspaper or magazine article. Hopefully you're not watching this, you're experiencing this, and you're participating in it with the text chats we have on a place like gunchannels.com. And one of the things we'll be talking about today, I have in the, I guess I haven't updated the description here, but we're going to talk about a couple of things tonight, and one of them will be gun channels and some of the issues that we have in a gun community and what gun channels can do and is built to be a tool for some of that. But it's Monday, so we have a different focus each day of the week. And like I say, our main goal is to provide a place for us to have a conversation that's shielded or in resistance to the whatever's going on, news of the day, and with the frustrations and apathy that can go along, and with a focus, too tight a focus on politics. So to give people a stress relief when necessary and a consistent, interesting conversation to have each weeknight. So on Mondays, we try to focus on the industry and not the industry, how to be to a media, how the nuts and bolts, how to flipping the internet over and looking at the wires and the tubes that make the internet happen, and the tools, the cameras, the telephones, the keyboards, and the cameras that we use to create content. And when I say we, I mean everybody. Everybody's listening to this has the ability to use their phone to create content just like everybody else and add to that collective. So that's what we talk about on Mondays. Tuesdays is 2A. Talk about 2A issues. Wednesdays is our entertainment blow off and get less serious stuff. And then on Thursdays, we talk about training and CCW or anything else that's not one of the other topics during the week. And then on Fridays, we talk about the industry and tech, so that we keep a big or a loose focus on some topics. But lately, we've been having panel discussions, people that join in from the gunchannels.com text chat out there. So anybody that's interested, if you don't already have a link in your email, which a lot of you do, feel free to join in and participate in the show by jumping over to Gun Channels. So tonight, though, I have a couple of things. We have Every Second Matters coming up tonight, so or tomorrow. So then, I guess I haven't sent him a link. Well, this way, 786. But Every Second Matters coming up tomorrow, so we can start planning on that. And since it's Every Second Matters, I like to do some sort of project or something. And tomorrow I'm going to be working on the 2A, well, what I call it, I guess I'm calling it the Minuteman University, but more specifically the 2A history portion of that. Hey there, Cycle. Thanks for jumping in. I guess I didn't introduce Cycle's jumping in from Connecticut. Thanks for joining. And Night Strike's jumping in from South Carolina. Thanks for joining in.
Thanks for the invite.
You bet. Like I say, I've got some invites out via email, and then just drop some more as I was distracted there on the gun channel side. So tonight, though, I named it Kalashnikov Library because I've been working on a project that will that was sort of an exercise to work on something tomorrow. And with that, I can now log out of what I was logged into, and we'll just do some screen sharing, and we'll talk about books. We'll talk about AK-47 books for a bit. And the other side of that is the structure I use to put this site together. So we're going to talk about a website I've been working on. And most of the time when I'm working on a website, it is to hone some skill or use some kind of tool or something that might be new or whatever to accomplish some other task. So if it's for a client or if it's some other project, I'll practice with something else. And there's no point, I don't like practicing on nothing, so I'll practice on usually AK-47 stuff. So if I get something half built and I figure out what I need to figure out, I can walk away from it, and instead of just having a bunch of scratch paper on my hard drive somewhere, there's a bit of information out there on the internet. So it's not anything that brings in any kind of revenue or income. So it's just, it's something I can put out there on the web, and it, most of the time I have a lot of these projects that are just kind of half built, but in this case, it's probably about half built, but I got a bunch accomplished. I figured out some things I needed to do as far as organization. I figure we can talk about those tonight. And then of course the books themselves, but we'll see how the conversation goes. In addition, then we've got some issues. We always have issues with the gun community, and depending on what kind of interaction we get tonight, we can delve into some of the issues that are going on today. And again, how gun channels was built to be a tool, and how we can use it as a tool to overcome some of the issues that we'll just always have as human beings working together. Let's see. So before we dig in, what do you guys think about what we're talking about so far tonight? Any thoughts come to mind or anything?
I just need to know what AK-47 books I don't have that I need to get.
Oh, I'm sure you don't have any of them.
Probably not. So
there's a lot, and this here, I don't know if you can see this picture on my screen. This is like years ago. It's a long time ago picture. So there's 3 times this easy. Right. Psycho, do you get into collecting books at all?
I have a few. I don't really, given the choice of buying guns or buying books, I'd rather buy guns. But I do have reference text. So when I buy books, I buy reference text. Mm-hmm. So like the 3 of them that I can see right from where I'm sitting is I've got the Handguns of the World book, and I've got another one that's about military rifles, a really old book, actually. It's all musty smelling. And then I've got a newer book with military rifles as well. So, and I have, I have picked up, I think I picked up one specialty book on oh Christ, the freaking junky guns that everybody buys.
Mosin Nagants?
Yes, the Mosin. I bought a book on the history of the Mosins, and I think I bought another book on the guns of Japan. So it's based on what I'm collecting at the time.
And then when you get a book like that, you're satisfied with a book on the subject that you're interested in, typically?
Well, because I typically use them as reference text. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I actually read them.
Okay. So it's more like a companion accessory to the gun. So if there's something that comes up in the course of gun ownership or conversation, you have something immediate that you can go reference right away.
Yeah, and sometimes it's nicer to have an old book than it is to try to ferret stuff out of the internet. That's the big thing, is a lot of these books are not available in digital format because they're kind of old. And so if you really want the information, like you go on gun forums and they'll say, well, go get this book because it's the only thing that has this information. And people might reprint a page or 2 here and there. But, for the really older stuff, and especially stuff that's not in print anymore. You're better off trying to find the book. Like usually I'm able to find them used, and I get them off like Amazon and stuff like that.
So I'll ask that question out there to whoever's out there. If you use the, if you have a library, if you read AK, or not AK books specifically necessarily, but just books about guns and that kind of thing. All right, so I threw some links out there, so if anyone wants to dig in. So what we're looking at is I have a bunch of different websites, and a bunch of those websites are on the Kalashnikov or AKs and stuff like that. And this is the reason I have them, so I can do projects like this that can then exist. I think of them as, I don't know what to think of them as, just presentations, I guess. Accumulations of knowledge, kind of like a book report, I guess, except in a way cooler form because it's interactive to some extent. And I really enjoy the concept of databases and what databases can do. So databases is just a spreadsheet. So imagine a spreadsheet with just a big grid, grid graph paper. And in one column, you might have a date. And then in the next column, you might have the title of the book. And in the next column, the author of the book and the publisher and, everything you can think of, how many pages it has and what it might be about. And then once you have a bunch of data accumulated in some kind of database, then you can display it in all different kind of interesting ways. For example, by the decade that it's created in, or the type of book, if it's a book or a magazine or a manual, or once you give the items in your database some attributes, you can start to pull out items from the database by those attributes, for example, like from a certain publisher or in a certain language and things like that. So once you've got some data and once you have a place to present that data, it's pretty much up to you with the tool of a website, or in this case WordPress, of how to present that, and then find in the couple of tools or resources that you might need to actually do the functionality or the pieces that you might need to make up everything. So when I start with the website, we won't start with the complete basics here, but I create the website, I give it a name, and then give it the software to give it some kind of a structure and look to it. And with this particular one, with the books, what I'm trying to do is, pretty much my goal is to archive every single book, not only in my collection, but every single book that's been written about the Kalashnikov. It's not a huge project. I mean, it's possible, but it's not, it's not the huge scope, but it's something I haven't seen anybody else do before in any kind of real meaningful way. So it's something that I work on, just like my bayonet collection and the ammo and other things. When I have time and when I have a couple of hours worth of interest, I can push, into the project like this. So the site is designed to present all the different books that have been written about the Kalashnikov. So when I start to accumulate those, both, in my library and on the website, some organizational, I guess, or structure becomes evident. For example, the dates, right? They had to be published at some point. Sometimes they're second editions and, new, what do they call, like, I guess, a volume 2 or something like that. So, some things are a little bit different, but for the most part, everything gets printed. So that's one way to organize them. And then you got, like some of the things I already talked about, the publishers or the languages that they're printed in, or the topics that they cover. As you accumulate books on a subject, they're going to have different focuses in that subject. So that's what happens in this library. So that's what I've been doing. So I have a couple of pages of like intro and just kind of to explain what the thing is. And then there's, without getting too obvious, explaining every single detail, there's pages for the different decades where you can scroll through and browse them that way. Then again, all the different ways to sorting them out. So that's one of the things I was trying to figure out. So WordPress is basically a blog. It's what it started out with, and its kind of basic structure is it's a bunch of it's a structure of pages that are designed to present posts. So your blog posts or your individual blog entries is what it's designed to archive, and those are the entries in your database, you could say. And then there's pages in its structure that allows you to give those individual posts some amount of navigation and some way to organize them so that a human being can see more than just one list of all your stuff you've ever written. So with that in mind, I needed something that could show posts on a page. And for whatever reason, that's just not built into WordPress. So we can get into that a little bit with these guys if you've done that before, if anybody out there has questions on that. But I needed to come up with something. So I found what's called a plugin, a little extra functionality to plug into the WordPress software that allowed me to do that. And the one I found, did this. It gives you the title, and it gives you a little thumbnail of the picture from the thing, and it gives you a little blurb, and then it goes on to the next one. And that allows me to put them in, like I say, in the different decades here, and then to present them items from that database in there. And then whenever somebody clicks on one, it takes them to the page that has all the information about that book or whatever it happens to be. So that's a little bit about what I've been working on. The idea here was to take this and take it over to the 2A history stuff that I'll be working on tomorrow. But instead of just plain working on that site, this site, I wanted to give it some attention anyway. So I use this as an excuse to go in and kind of fluff this site up a bit. So with that said, I'll let you guys talk if you want to say something, and I will see if anybody's saying anything on the text chat.
Can I ask a question other than this? If someone was going to go and start collecting some of these books, which ones would you specifically, that are the easiest to find, would you specifically recommend? Because you've got a whole bunch listed here. I don't know which ones I should start looking at getting first.
Yeah, so that's going to depend. I mean, books are, on a bunch of different topics and stuff. So I haven't dug into that too much. I used to have the top 5, I think, and I had like a top 10. Back when I was doing videos and stuff, I would do videos and that kind of thing, and then add sections to the page for that. So I'll eventually put that back in. I can kind of answer your thing in a couple of ways. One, I just started buying books like Cycle did, just kind of as companion things to the guns that I was interested in. Only problem is the particular data for the AK probably mirrors some of the other information that's out there, but it became known gradually. Is that the word? So like, originally, well, before 1947, of course, there was no data. So, during the Cold War and stuff, that data was not being sent over here for sure, and it wasn't really documented there. So the creation of that content or data, has come in spurts, and it's been interesting. So anyway, so the books have kind of mushroomed in the last few years. So in the beginning, I had a couple of books, but I guess when I would compare some of those first books with each other, the data was conflicting, to say the least, and it was wrong. You knew one of them was wrong, so that was the problem. So you'd end up having to acquire a few different books to get a consensus, I guess, to try to figure out what was right. But then, of course, the internet happened in the middle of all this, and then we were able to figure out real quick where the problems were and which books were right and wrong. So I guess I'm trying to answer which books to get first, it's tough. Like I started with maybe 10 or something, I guess, and then started to add more as they become available, and then to fill holes or something that I was doing. So there's some of the books are picture books, I guess you could say. Some of them are designed just to have really nice photographs for people that are creating guns or artwork or dioramas or something, or like little dolls that they'll dress up or something, or models or something that they want to have accurate pictures of what the prototypes or specimens are supposed to look like.
Right.
Then there are historic books like that are all words, and they're sometimes, I would say, those are divided up between interviews type of books where you talk about the stories and the interactions and stuff, and then you've got your detailed tech type books that just get into the lineages and the nuts and bolts of variations and prototypes. So there's a couple like that, and then you get into, with AKs, you get into variations. So the couple of the really thick books that look like phone books in there are going to be the variations, where they talk about the different countries and all the different types of AKs that come out of the root branch off from the trunk. And then there's another whole branch of them that are assholes that write anti-gun like books about the AK and how the AK is responsible for everything bad in the world. And there's probably a good 10% of them are like that. And then you've got reprints of the manuals, since all the manuals originally started in whatever commie languages. You've got some of the, well, the first book really is just a reprint of Russian manual, and then they go on through just plain translations, through like translations with additional like insight, I guess you could say. Like one of the more recent ones is a translation, but kind of done through with a guy who was a Spetsnaz, in 2018. So definitely different perspective than that original reprint from like 1963 or whatever. That it's literally just the little Russian translations of the words, because they'd never seen the gun before. At least nobody who was translating it had ever seen the gun.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you could go with some manuals. And then you got issues with the best books are expensive. So if you go with cost, there's probably the top 10 you could go with that are under $20 that are going to together be a useful set of books, or an interesting set that keep you, reading or interested and seeing pictures, or go with fewer books, but some of the, the bigger ones, which are definitely encyclopedias, basically.
Okay.
So one of the things you're kind of dancing around here while you talk about this is that these kinds of projects, you actually come up with a new kind of metadata to describe the books. So for instance, like you said, a book may be primarily a historical reference. This happened, then that happened, then this variant was made, and then this company started making it, and all that kind of stuff, which is very different from okay, here are the features and blow up diagrams of this variant versus that variant, where it's more a technical manual. And then there's like which countries they were done, and you have to create your own metadata, and that's one of the ways you can start sorting this stuff. So for instance, if it's a coffee table book, which is what I call books with lots of pictures and very little real data, that's a big difference between a guy that's looking for a technical reference that says, here are the markings you're going to find on this one versus the markings you're going to find on that one, and this is what the markings mean. Or here's the this model happened, and then they ran into this problem, and so they came up with this variant, and the difference between this one and this one is like the length of the flash hider or the type of that kind of stuff. And that's a very different kind of book than a historical perspective of who was the guy that built it, where did he used to work, what other things has he built, and that kind of metadata. That's the stuff that's really tough, because you have to kind of come up with it on your own. And I do this. I don't do websites, but when I was learning how to program, relational databases and stuff, I did the same thing with music, right? I had a huge music library, and I was trying to find a way to cross-reference, different kinds of music, and I had to start coming up with my own metadata that kind of like described each song or each collection of songs. And that's what really made the thing useful to me, because once I had once I had categorized them well, I could find them easier. I could find things that I wanted to do easier. And so I was wondering, you talked about this kind of spreadsheet. I'm too much of an IT guy to conflate a spreadsheet with a database, but I just wondered if with WordPress, can you have an actual, like a relational database in back of it, and then have WordPress be sort of like your front end to diving through that database?
Yeah, and I might be using wrong terminology too, because I'm more of a user than under the hood myself. So, I mean, I might, forgive me if I'm saying stuff wrong, and I'm not using the best analogy, but I'm trying to translate for people too. But yeah, that's basically, I think, what I'm doing. So like when I've got, let's jump into an actual example of a post or whatever. Like this post will have attributes down here. So like I can bring up all listings or whatever, every entry that has a similar 2000 characteristic to it. And that'll be a list of all of these here. So is that what you're talking about? Like another, you put a bunch of attributes or tags on your post.
Yeah, that's metadata, right? It's not something that's inside the book. It's something that you use to describe the book.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's really what we're talking about. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really what I'm trying to do here. I'm using books because I think everybody understands what a book is. And I hopefully have described like the involvement in this one. Like I'm going to use this picture here, which is a picture of my library from a while ago. So starting on the left, you got some manuals, which are literally just manuals. And some of these are like old Russian, like what they would give a soldier or something. And then some are from like AKs, like imported stuff from China or wherever. These are things you can get for sometimes free or $1 or something at a gun show. So I just grab whatever AK manuals when I find them. Then I got some DVDs in here, which probably run the gambit from training to like disassembly and armorer type of stuff. You got this old book, like what you're talking about. It's basically an old-fashioned book from like I think the 60s. There's just a whole bunch of penciled line drawings of different firearms, just tons of small like military small arms. Got a couple of Life magazines, which were the first times the Western world ever saw an AK-47 in traditional, big media. Then you get into some of the books. This is the guy who was the curator of the Smithsonian's firearms thing. Whole big, like long history of being a gun guy. He met Kalashnikov like back in the day and wrote this book about that meeting. And he arranged all the meetings. I'm pretty sure he arranged either all or the two of the big meetings that Kalashnikov even came to this country is because of the author of this book. Later, after he dies, one of the other books is an expansion of his writings after having met him. So this is kind of two books bookend, the life of Kalashnikov coming from the Soviets or from communism into capitalism. Anyway, I'm not even getting into it. Each of these books is like so much different nuance there that it's like you're saying, like you can, I'm sure in like a library or something, these would either be fiction or nonfiction, but in the realm of like AK stuff, yeah, I'm trying to give them attributes. Like the coffee table book is a good one. I hadn't thought of that one, but there are like 3 or 4 of them that are exactly what you consider a coffee table book, which is interesting, but makes them almost useless. Like Vickers' new book, $100. It's got great pictures and everything, but this thing is massive. It's the biggest book out of all the other books physically. And it just makes it unwieldy. Like you try to open the thing, you need like an entire desk to open it up. And then the pictures are huge. So if you're trying to, I can imagine why you'd need such huge pictures. So some of these things are, like you say, like that's sort of the gist of it. Some of these are anti-gun, so how's a library going to denote that something's got an anti-gun spin to it? And, sure, it's anti-gun, but it's got some valuable insight because the guy, was embedded somewhere or something, or he has some, he was in a position to have some insight, even though he hates the gun. So some of those things are what I'm trying to get across in this exercise. And then, like I say, with the authors, there's a couple of authors. There's like Rod Stott, the guy from Germany, from Texas and Germany. He's involved with most every good book in here, taking pictures. So in an effort to, like under the authors and photographers, like an effort to show people like, Kalashnikov wrote 3 books himself. His daughter wrote a book. His grandson wrote a book. Then you get the guy, I don't know how to say that, Ezel.
Yeah, he writes some great books.
Yeah, he has a ton of good books, and his books about Kalashnikov are not only.
I have is Edward Ezel. Yeah.
And he's not just a good gun writer, but he had like unprecedented, what would be the word, like
access
to the Kalashnikov, exactly. And they like corresponded with each other. He's part of the reason he came to this country. So or to the free world even. So, part of the reason probably Kalashnikov gets the respect he does is because this guy, acknowledged it back in the day. Then you got Stott, like I say, involved with pretty much all the big books out there. So anyway, that's part of it. Yeah, is to create the metadata that allows this aspect of it to be recorded, where otherwise it would just be a bunch of entries in Amazon under, small arms or something, right?
Yeah, and the thing with books like this is, I was in information systems and data processing for many decades, and I had a huge library of reference text, and of course the problem was they got old. And new versions would come along and they would get obsoleted and they would kind of go by the wayside. Whereas these kinds of reference texts, they don't you know, as long as those guns are around, those reference texts will never, they may be superseded by newer, glossier pictured references, but the data in them is not going to get old and die. Those guns still exist. Those markings still exist. Those linkages between designers and manufacturers and all that kind of stuff. Because I'm a firm believer that the history of firearms is a history of civilization, and that's one of the reasons I find them so fascinating. And for me, it's not just, well, here's another interesting blowback mechanism, or here's a roller delay thing that's really weird. With me, it's more, what was the problem they were trying to solve, and what was the climate of the world at that time that made them solve the problem that way. Why did they need, what was the whole bit with the walk and shoot, mid-range machine gun? Why were people even thinking about shit like that? What about the entrenched machine gun? How did warfare change that caused the tools to have to change? And obviously, like with the development of the tank, it wasn't really a good idea to have fixed in place guns anymore. You had to be more mobile to keep the tanks from running over you. And airplanes. And airplane. Oh yeah. Yeah. Missiles. Holy shit. That changed the world now that we have missiles like cruiser. I mean, even a cruise is considered old technology nowadays, but learning about that kind of stuff, those kind of books don't really go out of date. Newer versions come out, newer volumes come out, but the books themselves don't go out of date. I mean, like I said, I have one old book over there. I think it was published in like the 1940s or the 1950s. And for old military guns, it's a fabulous reference because it's pretty broad in scope and it has a lot of detail. So it's broad and deep, which is kind of nice. And you would want to differentiate that from when I talk about a coffee table book, I don't mean by like how much it weighs. I mean that a coffee table book is a book where you sit there when you got nothing else to do and you kind of flip through it and look at the cool pictures. It's kind of like thumbing through a Life magazine.
You're not really like a conversation, like a reference. You can point at something.
Yeah. But it's not a serious reference book for like a person that really wants to get down and dirty and find out some of this stuff. It's a very superficial look at stuff. That's what I consider a coffee table book, is a very superficial look at stuff. Like I've got one on guitars, for instance, and it'll show you a picture of a guitar and it'll give you maybe a page and a half that kind of describes who built it, why they built it, what was new about it. And then you flip to the next one, but there's no real detail. There's no, exploded diagrams or circuit diagrams of the new, if it's an electric guitar, what the new circuits are in it. That's a coffee table book. It's just a very 30,000 foot view of the subject.
Yeah, I was gonna say scratching the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as far as the reference books, though, and that probably is a factor of publishing and tastes and requirements, I guess, like what supply they were trying to satisfy. Because I'm guessing a lot of these were, probably focused at like libraries and not just textbooks necessarily, but maybe like as reference for classes, maybe in the military schools or something, or in machining or something, when they were doing like these books that are just like the size of phone books, but they're just all line drawings of like guns. And like you say, very little info other than nomenclature and taxonomy. But they're just, I don't know, almost like those bird books or something. They're like identification books more than anything. Or maybe it's, again, for reference in like a news thing, and you see something and you want to go verify that you're writing about the right gun. So you're going to go look at a reference book like that. So those things are, like you say, they don't go bad, but they do get edited, or, people clarify, I guess, knowledge is added to them.
Well, they update them, yeah.
And that's something that, we have with the forums. We have the potential for, and that's where I get a lot of my info is from the forums, where someone will have a post about something or a thread about something, and other people will come along and contribute to it. Forums are dependent, like anything, on the funding and the infrastructure or whatever, and if it can handle the growth. So when you have a forum, you have topics on a broad range of things that attract a lot of people, and that's how you get the data. But if you depend on the forums themselves as the only archive of it all, you're depending on all kinds of infrastructure and longevity and things that tend to not exist over time. So by gathering info and posting it on projects like this, on whatever the topic is, what you end up with is a standalone website will be recorded by the internet. The internet will record the internet every couple hours. And as you create the content like this, it's there. So of course I can do a backup of it after I accumulate this, or periodically as I accumulate it and add to it, do backups and, to be able to recreate it or whatever, but the internet will just always be there. So when we look at stuff, the internet as a tool that we're using, unlike a lot of the other tools that we have, it doesn't go away. The things that we add or the things that we do on the internet, accumulate and will eventually be, part of the general knowledge out there. So I think there's some value to these projects and the individual subjects that people are interested in. You're keeping that data, that information alive, but the skill set you acquire can be pointed and focused on anything. And once you've got it, this is right here. This is a couple of hours worth of work. This isn't massive project. So tomorrow I'll be focusing all this on updating the Minuteman University site, where I've created a lot of data over there, but I haven't mobilized the tool like here by putting it all into the database so that it can be sorted and utilized more efficiently. Like right now, it's just a bunch of dead data, static data that requires someone to search to it, and that makes navigation and site layout and everything real difficult. And as far as the internet goes, the more dynamic or organic, I guess, I don't know what the word is, the more dynamic you make a site, though, the more stuff there is for the internet to index. So if you just take a bunch of paragraphs, for example, and stick them on 3 pages on your website, the internet will see that as a 3-page website. If you take those 3 paragraphs and you turn them into posts, and then you create 10 different pages to filter and display those posts, the internet will see that as 10 pages. So you can create a much larger website out of a set of data by making it dynamic. So that'll be the project tomorrow. And like I say, the tool that I needed to do that was something I was practicing with on the books project here. Hopefully this is going into somebody's ears and resonating, but if you have questions or whatever, feel free, we can clarify. Without any kind of feedback, it's difficult to know what we're doing here. So I feel like that teacher on Ferris Bueller or whatever. But a little earlier, let's see, somebody had asked about, Honda was saying that, like my Yugo, is there a book about the Zastava or Yugoslavia A case? I don't know of any books that come specifically out of Yugoslavia. As I've created my library, it's been focused on, basically I tried to figure out what books existed prior to whenever I started collecting in the mid-2000s, and that was possible. There are only so many books that have already been created, and then at least in the mid-2000s, there wasn't that many new books coming out, so it was possible to acquire the new books that came out. So for a minute there, I was, pretty much just riding a pretty decent library, and then, acquiring the old ones that I was missing holes in the collection or whatever. Occasionally I would find, or I still find, an old book that I didn't know about, but with the internet, being able to search and having time in the live chats and stuff, to search and stuff, I think I found most of them. But here's the big caveat: in English, because I don't search in every other language. So it's definitely possible for there to be books in other languages that I'm totally not even aware of. But as far as an English written book, there's nothing about the Yugos specifically, and only the Grim Reaper probably barely talks about them. And I have not done enough research on that particular book to determine if it's accurate on the Yugos or not. But the Grim Reaper is a big book that's about the size of a phone book. It came out with the first one in 2009, and that book sells for like $300 now. So they came out with the second version of it in 2015. I'll actually find it here. And yeah, I'm still screen sharing. This new version is still for sale, and I think it's like $60 or $70. It's 1,000 pages, and it's hardcover, as thick as a phone book, and comes out of Nevada. So that's about the only book you're going to get, I think, with something decent about Yugos in it.
Neat.
I mean, there's lots of other books that have Yugos in them, but they're just going to be some pictures and maybe the names, the model numbers or something. Military surplus, small arms of the world, a basic manual of military arms, many printings. Yep.
See, go over and see if I have that one or not. Somebody mentioned the Smiths. Yeah, WHB Smiths. So my book of rifles, which is it actually on the dust cover, it says an encyclopedic reference book, and it's the Book of Rifles by WHB Smith and Joseph E. Smith. And this one, God, this was copywritten. I'm trying to find the copyright notice on it because it's really old. This is the musty one that I bought. Book of Rifles. Yeah, this is a third edition, which was not published till 1963, and the first printing was 1948. This guy goes all the way back to the Japanese guns, like the ones that were at the museum there, the J.M. Davis Museum, the oldest gun he's got. And this is just a fantastic reference. I mean, you know, it's got pictures of the guns and cutaway diagrams and, you know, line drawings where you need them. It covers ammunition as well as the guns. What a friggin' great book.
So now, I mean, this has nothing to do with nothing that we're talking about tonight, but yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a fan of just old ones. I like the Bannerman catalogs for that reason, just looking at them. Really like looking at just old periodicals, magazines from like the 60s and 70s, gun magazines. Just look at those ads and stuff in the back. I thought it was cool.
Oh, some guns, that's the only trace you have of them anymore. Is the pictures that they had in magazines, because the manufacturers went belly up, the materials were never saved. You know, it's just a shame.
Yeah, I've got I bought a, you know what an MRE box looks like, right? At least for a long time, the MREs were in sort of that long rectangle shaped box, and it's a pretty solid box. And like I guess they're all pretty much the same. You cut the straps on them, and the one side would come off, and then you could put it in the other side. Anyway, you could kind of use the empty box as a storage thing because it was well made. Anyway, I found a guy that was selling pretty much mostly SWAT and American survival guides, like, but a whole thing like that, a whole MRE box full of them, and I got them for a great price. So had this giant box. I mean, is that thing like 2 feet long? So that's a ton of magazines. It's just a mess of them. And going through the articles are kind of neat. They're kind of old. So like you say, some things like a gun. What's that ASP? You know, that like little ASP pocket pistol that had a clear scales, so you could see how much ammo was still in it by looking through the scales. You know, like that kind of gun that didn't last very long. So seeing articles about that is pretty much all you're going to get. You're not going to find too many people that have one or do videos on them or anything. And then the ads at the back are just super cool. Found a bunch of you know, stuff I like the little mini revolvers. So if you go back in old gun magazines back in the day, they were selling those little revolvers. All the different companies were selling them. So I think it's neat to find those old ads. Find a lot of knife ads back there.
Yeah, you know, like you said, a lot of times it's very difficult to find things. A lot of these books, the difficulty I have with the older books is because they didn't have technology. back then to do things like good cross indexes. And so sometimes it's a little hard to find the information in them.
Mm-hmm.
I love a book with a good index and an alphabetized, a good table of contents in the front and a great index in the back where they take the keywords, extract them, and they cross-reference them to the different pages. And that's something that took, months and months, in the old days, because it was all done by hand. And now you just run a program and, it does the whole thing. It's great.
Do they had to do that all by hand? And then at least a couple of times somebody had to check all that. All of it.
And in fact, I ran into old programming books where you'd go to look the stuff up and the pages would be wrong because they revised the book but forgot to revise the index. And it just drove you free. So it became like a guideline. If they said it was page 352, you went from 340 to 390 and tried to find it because it wasn't necessarily right where it was supposed to be. Now the website that you set up there, do you allow people to submit their own, like Amazon has the reviews, like they're not really reviews, but they're like people can comment on them and say, this is a positive comment, this is a negative comment, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So no, I don't, but I could. It's definitely an option. It's just a feature of WordPress, really. The problem is like a double-edged sword with a lot of things, or the balance on that is it opens it up for interesting feedback and insight from people, but at the same time you open yourself up to abuse by spam or whatever.
Yeah, let the trolls in. Yeah.
Well, not just the trolls, but like literal spam, like just the robots that'll go out there. And when you have something as common as a WordPress, anything that's used a lot is going to be a bigger target for people that are unscrupulous. So whatever open door window, however you want to think about a comment field on a website, there's ways for the robots to see those and jump on them. And you have to do effort as the person who puts that portal or that questionnaire or whatever you want to call, like that form out there. There's things that you need to do. So you can pay to have it protected from the robots, or you can, which is expensive, especially if you're going to do more than one project. It might be totally worth it if you have just a one or a couple of projects, but as far as free options, it requires time. So now it would
you could curate it. You could say your stuff's not going to show up till somebody reviews it, but Now you're spending your life reviewing people's comments.
And what happens is it's more than just a burden or a time waster. It's actually annoying because you'll get so much spam sometimes, depending on how popular or how open the door is. You'll get so much spam that it literally bogs down the computer. Like it'll just, even if you put it into a place where it's going to need to be reviewed, you'll have so many that it just takes you like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It could take you a while to delete all the individual items. So that's the only disadvantage, but that's a great question. So that's definitely something that would be useful on a project like this one. And if someone was curating, a couple of projects this way, I would highly recommend incorporating something like that.
Well, I was speaking to Night Strike's comment about what would you consider good books. Mm-hmm. Well, if you had that rating system of people that had actually read it, and he could read, like I always try to read the top 5 comments and the top best comments and the top worst comments. You know what I mean? Like when I'm looking at a book on Amazon, I read the top 5 best comments and the top 5 worst reviews, and I kind of run them up against each other to say, and that gives me a pretty good feel for what is the book really going to satisfy my needs or not. And that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, especially if somebody comes in like, this has no recipes in it at all. You'd be like, okay, well, this is a negative review, but this guy had unrealistic expectations for what this book is even about. But on the other hand, if they're like, this doesn't have XYZ and you're buying the book for XYZ, you saved yourself some money.
Well, so a guy might write a comment that says, this is a great book with beautiful glossy pictures. Like I was just looking at one a minute ago, Bolt Action Rifles of the World. And that, after I got it, I realized it was a coffee table book. It's got gorgeous full color pictures of wonderful bolt action rifles and very little real data. So you could, I mean, you could look at it's kind of like an identification thing. You know, you can look at it and say, oh, that's one of those. But if you really want to understand like when it was made and how many were made and what factories made, you know, that kind of shit, and you know what technological innovations were incorporated in the different guns, it's totally useless for that. So it's great if somebody says, well, I've got this old gun and I'm not really sure what it is. You can come in, run them through the pictures, and he can say, oh, there it is. And you can do that very easily because the photography is just gorgeous. But but if he was asking, how old is my gun or where do you think it was made? It was like, it's fucking useless for that stuff.
Okay, so you've brought a couple of things up that are interesting. So first, I highly recommend projects like this for any kind of thing you might be into, including any kind of hobby you might have. Doesn't, you know, for Second Amendment stuff, I think it's more valid because we need to have Second Amendment stuff represented on the web in a positive way. But let's say it's guitars, or let's say it's, you know, your toaster oven collection. By posting your own collection or stuff about your collection. So I've got my library up here, the books that I own and books that I don't own. Now I can go to let's say a gun show or a gun shop somewhere, and I can be like, oh man, like that cover. There's a couple of the magazines where the gun is in the same orientation. It's almost the same gun. One has a dark background, one has a light background. Do I own the one that's the light background or the dark background? You know, and I can use my website as a reference for myself, as my own buyer's guide. So that's one thing that's useful to have something like this as your own reference, because we can get the internet pretty much everywhere we go. But yeah, as far as the contributing info about them, the comments are a good way to do it. I would say though, if you are going to do a project like this, I would take it a step further, especially if you're interested in not just finding others who are interested and having conversation, but if you're interested in creating an accumulation, if you want to present the best data possible, then take the data from, or the info that's useful and valid from your comments, and permanently put them in your content. And there's ways to do that, attributing it to whoever commented it, or, you know, having links or whatever is appropriate, you know, out of respect or out of you know, accuracy. But then that way it's not dependent on your 7 months later or 7 years later, you decide to go with a different version of chat. And now you have to worry about getting all those chats out because they're valuable and associating with the text that they came from. So by going in and routinely like adding to your actual content with whatever you found, then you've got the best of both worlds. Further,
just searchable content. Yeah.
Then I'm going to go further and say one of the reasons we built gun channels is because we personally at gun websites have a lot of projects. And if we had, you know, for just these reasons, if we had a separate comment thing on each one, it would be not only on a lot to manage, and it would take a lot of time, but it would be pointless because all those individual conversations would be taking place effectively in vacuums. It was like we created a bunch of little vacuum tubes to have these conversations in. And while that might be useful or necessary even for some projects, our goal is to get people having conversations and contributing to the overall set of knowledge on the internet, you know, in firearms. So we've started out with a forum back in the old days when we first had, you know, all the websites up and running. Like, we didn't just start buying domain names. We had a huge working empire of network of websites, and then we would add new pieces to it. So when we were rocking and rolling back in the day, we had a problem where we had 350 websites for a while running with data in them, and that we were actively, you know, we had a bunch of people that were creating data and putting it on there, just sort of like what Gear Report's doing today. But we didn't want to have every single site have its own comment stuff. So we created a forum and directed all of our comments over to the forum, and that accomplished, like I say, the tech side of it, but then it also put all the comments from all those different venues. Some of them were driving, some of them were gear, like backpacking and, you know, binoculars and stuff, and some of them were guns. It brought all those conversations into one place. And you know, forums were great for a while, and then, you know, fast forward 10 years, well, I guess 7 years or something, and then we get to, you know, instead of building a forum after YouTube failed at any effort, any attempt, or any even ability to maintain like an actual community, we built gun channels because it's the evolution of a forum. It gives us all more tools than just, you know, threads and posts on forums. But then that would be the other option. If you're creating content like this and you don't want to tackle the comment side of it, mirror it over on gun channels. Create a channel and either incorporate that or put your data on gun channels if you want. And then that way you can have your conversations there in the community where everybody's already logged in, and you don't have to worry about all the garbage. And if you ever have any issues technically, you've got me or Night Strike or Clover or others that are willing and able to help you out with whatever tech stuff. But anyway, that's definitely a good point, is that nobody, I don't think, is really trying to put even, I can't think of really anything you'd want to put on the internet and not get some sort of feedback on it. Even if it's a presentation of like a creative thing, getting some feedback is always useful, or always interesting. Well, I guess if your moms hate attention or something, then you don't want comments.
Yeah, and the other thing is it preserves the knowledge. We had, of course, another one of my hobbies is motorcycles, and I never got into side hacks, but we have a very active three-wheelers group between Massachusetts and Connecticut, and there was one guy, his name was Sarge, and he owned a dealership for a long time, and he custom built a lot of rigs, and he did a lot of special front ends and linkage kind of things. And when that guy died, it was a real blow to the community, because nobody had ever captured that information of all the different things that guy had been into, all the different ways he had of setting stuff up. And they were really difficult. It was really difficult to gather that information. Whereas if they'd had something like this, they would have at least had the threads of the conversations. And, forums are kind of a pain in the ass sometimes, because there's a lot of bad information. Of course, there's a lot of bad information everywhere on the internet. But if you have a more curated forum like this, that really helps preserve the knowledge. And when people bite it or they change hobbies or whatever, at least you've got some place as a reference you can come back to and find again.
And that's another aspect of this effort, is that so many people get really interested in something, and then either they get sick of it, or they have to, for whatever reason, they have to leave it. And then if they're not there to maintain or curate or keep it going or be aware of it, then it can get lost. And when the forum will do like a purge and drop 100 megs worth of pictures because it needs to lighten up space, it costs money to have these old pictures there, and it'll just do it sometimes randomly or whatever. So boom, a bunch of pictures get taken down. Now you've got a bunch of maybe descriptions to those pictures, or valuable info in the post that's still there, but now you just got a bunch of dead things for pictures. And that's the kind of thing where, again, if you create some kind of project to archive and to accumulate all that data, you're efforting to keep that stuff out there somewhere. All right, so I'm asking for questions out there. People have offered a couple or asked a couple. Let's see. How to win friends and influence people. I don't know if you win friends, but I think you can act with respect, treat others with respect, and act with honor, and then people will respect you if you're doing the right things. AK Gunsmithing 101. Go low tier. I don't know if that's a question about the books or whatever. There aren't really many books on AK gunsmithing that I know of. Actually, there's no books that I know of that are on AK gunsmithing. Some of the new ones that I don't yet possess may delve into it, but there are DVDs. So a couple of different, I even made a DVD one time back in the olden days. I forget what year, 2005 or 6 maybe. I put together a DVD on how to build, and very few of those got sold. But other people, I remember back in the forum days, would put together DVDs. And then even in the YouTube days, there was a couple of DVDs that went out. Actually, there was a guy on YouTube who did really good DVDs, now that I'm thinking about it. And it wasn't until years later that he offered those live on YouTube. But there are some like Panteo or AGI production, what do they call it? Professional production level build tutorials, I guess, or build guides.
Yeah, I'm more like the idiot's guide to pretty much anything.
I mean, you could describe how to do a physical thing like putting together a AK, which requires some riveting and some folding and some, I don't know, that's about it, I guess, some drilling, I guess. So you could describe some of that, but a video, I think, is what if they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, a video's worth 1,000 pictures or something.
Oh yeah, watching Mark on Anvil when he's recovering a gun, being able to actually see what he's going through is very useful. Pretty good stuff.
Yep.
So then Hana was saying, are there any books that are a must-have? And that's, again, a difficult one to say because there's a bunch of books that are good. So, I'm going to make a couple of different efforts at putting there are books that are must-have, I guess, if you're a Kalashnikov guy, but you're not going to get them. Like, there's books that I got now that somehow are worth $300. Like, just, there's books that they don't make that many of, so they're just not out there. So I'll make a list of the ultimate, I suppose. And that's what I discovered when I was rebuilding this website. I had put a list up, but it was sort of the list of books that are obtainable, like the books you could still buy at the time on Amazon or something, or eBay. And whenever I let the site fall apart last time, it had to be years ago, between then and now, like whatever the page I had set up, which was supposed to be like books that are attainable, are like not obtainable anymore because they're gone. So, and new books have come around. So I'll put a bunch, I'm assuming a couple up. And then of course there's, specific ones like bayonets or like real history. There's history, like Cycle, I think, has been referring to like, which guns were made in Tula and which guns were made in Izmash and that kind of thing. But then there's history like which general was in charge of those factories and who was he pissed at and who took duties like begrudgingly and who was like happy to do these jobs and, who got butthurt that their design didn't happen. That was there's some gossipy type of histories. And then there's like literally out of the guy's mouth, you got Kalashnikov writing 3 different books throughout his life. So, there's some variety there. So it depends.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that I find when I say that the history of firearms is the history of people. That's the stuff that really interests me. Like when you find out when they were looking at the us forcing the 30-06, not the 30-6, the 308 on everybody. And, we probably should have skipped that and gone right to the smaller calibers. But that general was absolutely determined that the next rifle round that NATO accepted had to be like an American cartridge. And so that's how we ended up with the 7.62 x 51 being the same as the 308 and all that stuff. And that is just so, I really love reading stuff like that. It's very interesting. I don't remember any of it, but I enjoy reading it at the time. Yeah, because it's like a biography. And that's that's kind of like a category. Some of these books,
it's a gun biography.
Yeah, it's like a gun. They read like a gun biography of what was going on in the world and what were all the different influences. And I'll use your series on the Ring of Fire guns. The thing that makes that interesting is not so much the guns themselves, but how the different families passed them back and forth. And, the guy would go down the street and then he'd start making them and, and then he'd go out of business and somebody else would take it over. And that's what makes that stuff really, to me, that's what brings the human aspect to it and the history aspect to it. I find that fascinating. But then sometimes you just want to know, hey, I've got this gun in my hand and I think it's missing a part. And I need a blow-up diagram in order to figure out if it's missing a part or not, because it just doesn't seem to be working, or is something put in incorrectly or whatever. And then you got to do a deep dive on a really technical manual, like you said, an owner's manual, a technical reference, an armorer's manual, that kind of thing. And so, all these, people need different kinds of information, and those real expensive books are the ones that are really well researched, have decent pictures, and usually have a lot of data on them. And I usually, I'll admit it, if I'm interested in a particular class of book, the first thing I do is I go to Forgotten Weapons and I say, has this guy reviewed any books on this topic? And I listen to his review of the book. Now, I weigh him with a grain of salt because he does tend to be overly nice. He's another one of those guys that doesn't ever want to say anything bad about a book. But you can tell when it's really good, you can tell. And if it's ugly so-so, you can pretty much tell. And he's the one that recommended the Handguns of the World by Easel. Well, at the time, those things were selling for $12 a piece. Now you can't touch them for much less than $100. And so it's kind of like, what you were saying, G, is some of these books when they first came out that they were giving them away, and now you can't touch them. And it's a shame because they're great references and you can't afford to buy them.
Well, and the other thing is, one of them I found is just literally a translation, like a translation with a bunch of pictures. So it looks like very different. It looks like not much more than a military manual, a U.S. military manual, which is a photocopy of a Russian military manual in a nicer binding, like in a binding that you get from Paladin Press or Delta Press, like a gun show type of book. And, that book is not worth $200 or something that it's going for because of its rarity. So that's another way to, save people a bunch of money, ideally, or at least give them some insight so they make a wise decision. They don't think they're getting something more than a bunch of photocopies from 1960s, not like what you're talking about, like an exploded diagram, like out of something like the Blue Book for Gun Values, or like a gunsmith
Sure.
guide.
Well, here's another example. So I'm trying to find a hand for that Model 5, that Webley Model 5 that I have. And I'm looking, I'm going through all the stuff. And I see on a forum, this guy says, well, there's this British guy that has these little, you can't even call them books. They're like glorified pamphlets. They're maybe 30, 40 pages of folded over paper. But he squeezes more goddamn data into those things. Great pictures, really good information about which parts are interchangeable with what guns. And so, yeah, you want to spend $20 for one of those? Shit, yeah. Now, it's kind of a book, it's got a crease and it's got pages. So I guess it's kind of a book, but you're not going to, that information you're not going to find anywhere else.
Yeah, that's all that matters. And then ideally, if you buy the book off of that guy for $2 or $3 or whatever, eventually gets enough to where he can have it published, or he figures out how to use the Amazon self-publishing thing, right? Where it comes out in a decent binding.
No, this was like I had to order it right from England, and it was just like, it's like the guy Xeroxed it himself, stapled it together, folded it over, and sent it to me. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. But eventually, once you support somebody like that who's got good data, they'll put it into a format that gets it on like an Amazon self-publish, where he just puts the data up and then you buy it for $3 and it comes to you as like an actual bound book that's decent. You know what I mean? Like that we're getting past where we're dependent on the person's ability to publish themselves, like the physical.
Right, but it is a law of supply and demand. I mean, there are very few people that are looking for information on Webley Model 5s,
Yeah, but all I'm saying is, I can remember some of the stuff you're talking about. Somebody sat down with a piece of paper and a typewriter and typed it all out and then literally photocopies it a bunch of times. But if the guy did anything on the computer, we're at the point now where he can take that Word document, give it to Amazon, and when you buy it for $3, he gets $1, and Amazon sends you a decent copy. Is all I'm saying, is that we're getting past where.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. It's like where we're at with circuit boards nowadays. I had no idea they've got these programs that you just throw right on your laptop, and you can design a PC board. You email your files, and you get like 10 boards for $10. Mm-hmm. And that's like, oh my God, never used to be able to do shit like that. That's amazing.
And that's where development goes, because now all of that data is, all the stuff that it used to take to get to that development stage is now hurdles, or they're no longer there anymore.
Right.
Now it's just
instead of a guy having to get an order for 100 boards. I remember we used to do this in the old days. I used to write for a guy that used to write for the old Byte magazine, and he ended up sending his board stuff out to Korea because he could get 100 or 200 board lots, relatively cheap. Well, now guys don't even bother selling that stuff anymore. They say, I'll just send you the file and you go to this service and they'll build the boards for you and send them right to you. And you don't have that whole startup cost and inventory or any of that stuff. It's great, especially with a lot of these kits. I run into this mostly with the ham radio stuff, but it's just amazing. I mean, somebody says, well, I came up with this great add-on board for this radio. And it's like, well, would you sell me one? And the guy says, no, but here are the files and here's where you go to get them made. So it's pretty slick.
I'm going to go over to the Gun Chat or the YouTube side. Guy said, what books go into detail about twist rate? Maybe an article here and there about twist rate for like various ammo. So I'm going to screen share again. There's actually
talking about ARs, really.
Well, I don't know, but I'm taking that since we're talking about AKs. We're talking about AKs tonight. So
okay.
There's a couple.
I didn't know they had different twist rates in an AK. See, there's a new thing.
I don't know if there is either, but maybe twist rates per bullet weight might be a thing if you're comparing different projectiles in your twists or something. But anyway, if any books are going to get into that, it's going to be two. One of them is from 2011, and it's a spiral-bound, like useful book. It's made by Eric Lawrence and then Mike Pannone. So Mike Pannone is a guy who was Marine Reconnaissance first, then Army Special Forces. So he's a Green Beret. Went from Green Beret into Delta. So he was in Delta and then got wounded and came out and went to Air Marshals and was an instructor for the Air Marshals for a long time. So somebody who's not just been there but done it for a long time, and then competent shooter. He's ranked like competition shooter and then an instructor since 2008. So coming from Green Beret and that kind of background, instruction and dissemination information is usually pretty decent with those guys. So and he's anyway, so this is going to be super valid info and presented well. It's one of my favorite AK things because it's also unique. So many of the books are focused on history and just generic, like, the models and the variants and stuff, because there's so many of them. And then some of the nuance to that, and then some of the origin stories, where this one's all about the user end. And it's not just a regurgitated, literally photocopy of an old Russian manual or some, maybe fancy Russian translation. So that's Mike Pannone, and then Eric Lawrence. And Eric Lawrence is the guy that ran Blackheart Publishing or Blackheart International, I think. So a couple years later, he came out with a book that I do not yet possess from Blackheart, and that's again designed for. This is 180 pages, a full-size book, written by Eric and he's a Green Beret also, written for weapon familiarization at military special op level. So hardcore, just getting to the nuts and bolts and then using it. So I haven't seen this one yet, but I've heard only good things. And that one's a little bit more difficult to get a hold of. This one you can still get a hold of. The manual you can get a hold of all over the place. And this one is possible if you look around the web. You can still find a copy once in a while. There's other manuals, but they're mostly just photocopies of Russian manuals, which are interesting, but I wouldn't call them like good, zeroing or distance type of info.
You were talking about, AKs and stuff. I actually found a unicorn the other day. I actually found a metal mag, a 10-round mag from my Mac 90 in 223.
Right on.
And I couldn't believe the guy had it. I found it, believe it or not, I found it at a gun show in Massachusetts, which is kind of weird because they have assault weapons bans just like we do. But the guy remembered that I had asked him about them the previous year, and the next year he ended up bringing he only had one left by the time I got to the table, but I was able to grab one. So. And that's something I don't even find in Tulsa. I go all over Tulsa looking for those, and I don't find them.
No, they were rare as hen's teeth even when they were still around. And then, well, I guess everybody back east grabs them. I was going to say, because they've been on for a long time.
Everybody in the communist states wants them. I could have had all the 20s and 30s I wanted.
I don't even want to tell you how many times I've seen people basically throw them away, like just ditch them when they're little ones out here. You know, like, I'm not going to use this. Like sometimes it'll come with a gun, or you know, they'll get some stuff and that'll be part of it. I mean, I've seen definitely shops just throw them into the like dollar bin or the $5 box or whatever.
Yeah.
But I've seen people basically, you know, same thing, just kind of shit can them into their drawer. Well, eventually it's going to go to a gun shop or a gun show in like a dollar box or something.
Yeah.
All right, well, I don't know how much life everybody's got in them. We got 15 people watching, only 6 people thumbed. So a lot of people are just chatting about whatever, just using the chat as a way to converse, which is fine. But the other topic I was going to talk about tonight, we don't have to get into. I was really hoping to get more people on the panel. But one of the reasons we built Gun Channels is as a community, not, you know, as a money-making thing. It's not really, our goal isn't to, you know, be a, what do you want to call it, like a networking club or something, where like once you are in, then you know you're automatically supported or anything. It's not like echo chamber or the pat on the back club. I don't know how to describe, like, you know, it's not, I didn't build a place so that anybody who paid the $1 a year or the $1 a month or whatever it is just automatically gets a free ride, right? It's basically it's just a community. It's an open forum. And over the years, I don't know if I'm not going to suggest I figured this out, but you know, in 2013, whenever we built the thing, we were really just trying to create a place where we could have a civil conversation that was happening on YouTube less and less often because of the abuse of the anonymous users. We wanted to create a place where we could have valid, you know, useful conversation every once in a while directed at pro-Second Amendment things. And the day-to-day conversations that we have that get, you know, more and more distracted with the petty, you know, are susceptible to apathy, and they're not useful. They don't keep people strong, and they don't keep people on topic. And, you know, that's what we wanted to build Gun Channels for. But since, I don't know, it's been like 6 years now that it's existed, you know, that's 6 years worth of time that's gone by. We built this thing at the end of 2013 when there was a massive grassroots uprising against Obama's, you know, potential executive actions and the potential of what the Democrats might do with our gun rights. And we saw the power of what a bunch of people just standing up and saying hell no collectively to the freaking state. And they sat the fuck down. So we built a place, you know, in an effort to build something for that. And over those years, what I see is people coming and going. I see people, you know, that are interested and put in effort. You can sit here and think about it. If you've been paying attention to live chats, if you're out there having a chat right now, if you're listening to this in the future and you don't participate in the live stuff to see the conversations, I'm sure the conversations are referenced enough in the live shows that you can think of people who are no longer around, that were here months ago, that were here weeks ago, that were here a year ago. And, you know, mainly I'm just saying, you know, because we have Gun Channels and it's shallow water compared to the deep water over on YouTube, because people that come to Gun Channels get known by the other people on Gun Channels, are part of the conversation. So their absence is, you know, obvious. We are aware of when people are here and we're aware when people leave. That, you know, you do that over time, you have trends, you get to see, you know, things that happen over time. And, you know, I didn't, again, build Gun Channels 6 years ago in order to find this out, but over the years, I'm discovering there's patterns, there's cycles here. Cycle camp, pun intended. But anyway, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight is that, you know, there's lots of ways I could run Gun Channels, and there's, you know, nobody comes along and says, you know, here's a stack of cash. So, you know, now I can run Gun Channels any way I want. I'm not asking for a stack of cash. I'm just explaining that I don't have my hands aren't completely tied, but my hands aren't completely free either. I think that we've run it in a way that allows it to foster pro-gun up stuff more than it fosters hate or garbage or, you know, useless time, which I think I would have shut it down a long time ago. I know I would, if it was simply regurgitating garbage and becoming a time waster for everybody. I believe that it's useful. However, it isn't a recipe and it isn't a set of instructions. There's no laws that you have to obey. There's no rules other than basic internet morals and internet decency, right? You know, like if you do anything fucking illegal or weird, you're gone. But aside from, you know, one or two, literally one or two people that have been either super racist, one guy was super racist, got kicked, and then another guy was abusive and got kicked. Aside from those two individuals, it's been basically an open forum, an open community for people to deal with each other. And I have no intention of changing that. I'm not setting this up as like a panel discussion, but I wanted to talk about that. And again, I don't know, I want to put all this weight on Night Strike, who hasn't said shit all night, and Cycle, who has, you know, I don't know if you even wanted to get into this, but it's something I did want to address at some point, that gun channels isn't supposed to be fucking easy. And I didn't fucking build the place to be like some sort of hippie, let's all dance around and say how great each other are thing. You know, everybody that contributes doesn't get a participation trophy. It's not necessarily rapids, but you have to sink or swim. And along with that comes, you know, the necessity, or at least the potential for us to have relationships, good or bad, with each other. And it's sort of a microcosm. If I noticed, you know, recently and obviously throughout the years, you know, there's been little issues with people, and I don't like this guy or this guy or this, I won't be in a chat if that guy's in there, this guy's being mean to me or whatever. When the fuck are we all going to kumbaya together and work towards the Second Amendment as some sort of, you know, theoretical, you know, hippie circle? We're all going to have to pick up a rope and pull in the same time every once in a while. We all put on the same color shirts when we need to be represented as gun owners. Is that a useful piece of gun channel? Should we do something to defend against that? I don't know if you guys want to even talk about it, or what do you think? Well, we got dead air, so.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. So we got to do something.
Well, the problem is beating the drum is it's a difficult thing. Like you said, it's shallow water, and it's a difficult thing to do in shallow water. Where I hate to admit it, but the other outlets, you know, like YouTube and Facebook and stuff, are a better chance, are a better place to do stuff like that, because gun channels is if you're in gun channels, you're not anti-gun, generally speaking. I mean, there's not a lot of people who sign up and say, give me a gun channels ID, and they're actively, you know, I'm anti-gun, or, I mean, they may be FUDs, but they're not actively anti-gun. And so when you're talking about it here, you're preaching to the choir pretty much, you know, except when you give people information on how to get things done, because these are people, you're closer to the group that might actually want to do something, if you get what I mean. So when you rant on YouTube, you don't know, you know, it's going out in the ether and a lot of people are seeing it, but you don't know how engaged those people really are. Whereas in gun channels, the people are much more engaged. So basically, like, I don't subscribe to channels on gun channels that are how to describe it? They're beating a dead horse. You know, they're. I mean, you know, I take the time to go up to the legislature. I write testimony. I do those kinds of things. I don't want to listen to somebody sitting there saying, "Oh, people aren't active enough and they need to do more," and blah 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 blah. Because it's like, yeah, bullshit. Get out of here. You know, I'm already doing that shit. And I think a lot of the people on gun channels are like that. And if they're not like that, most of them are, you know, they have limits, you know, like, you know, I work 14 hours a day, or I don't have the cash to go to, you know, my state capital is 300 miles away, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't see where I see the use in gun channels is for the collusion on, if you excuse that word, the collusion on methods and means. You know, that's where I think it's a good thing. Like, you know, how to set up, you know, how do you do testimony? How do you talk to people that are anti-gun? You know, who's got stuff that actually worked? How do you get people involved? You know, so it's more the how-to, you know, kind of stuff, as opposed to the generalized, hey, we all got to get out there and do stuff. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I think in gun channels, there's a fine line there between, beating people up because they're not active enough, and hey, here's some good tools and strategies that make this a little easier to go. Well, see, now everybody wants to come in and talk about this stuff. That's good.
Well, I guess the email links weren't enough. I had to drop them links inside of gun channels.
Oh, I had an email link right early.
I said I'm always scared because I send it to quite a few people again, and when I blind to so many people, I don't think my email cares, but yeah, I think it gets filtered sometimes.
Huh.
But anyhow.
Well, that's weird. Yeah, well, I've been gone, to be honest with you. I just got back from the Caribbean. So, that's why I haven't been around for a couple of weeks, is because I've been.
So you're fully rested and ready to
go. I'm on. I'm all ready for Tulsa. I'm ready to walk that extra, 11 miles or whatever the hell it is. Ready to go.
So I guess the topic, what did I even put in here? I put the topic in the email. But so trying to come up with the right word for it, because again, let's see what I wrote the damn word. Community issues, gun community issues. So I guess the alternative would be if you structured it like some of the forums. Some of the forums are very locked down and rigid. Here's the forum, and you got these rules that whenever you join, you're going to get these rules, and then they've got moderators that are policing the thing to make sure people oblige by those. And for whatever if it's a knife forum, for example, they don't want people in there talking about hatchets or something so they're going to lock down on that. So you can, potentially we could do stuff like that and put rules or some kind of guidelines, I guess would be the word. But overall, I think what you get then is even less useful tool, no? Because one of the aspects of the YouTube that was good was that, or one of the aspects of having a big base of potential people to participate is you get influence from different mindsets, right? Some different points of view and stuff. So you make it too much of you can hang out here, but this is what you got to say. Well, who the hell wants to hang out if they don't want to say that? And then you just have a echo chamber, kind of a,
Right. Well, that's...
Woods jumped in. That horse jumped in. You guys want to throw anything out there?
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, I just got up to do some paperwork and saw you guys were still on. I think definitely one thing that's great about the community you set up here is, especially me, kind of a newer guy, I've been around about a year, is I have notebooks and notebooks of stuff that I've learned here just in sitting in chats or just listening to things. But I think definitely we could get better as a community to definitely work towards each other and not tear each other down so much and kind of argue about petty little bullshit things. But maybe that's just me. Did I kill it?
Yeah.
No.
Ruin the whole show. I'm gonna start over again.
So are you talking about let me see, not to name any names, but his initials are Yankee Marshall. How he talks about, he doesn't really care about, I shouldn't say, I don't want to put words in his mouth. Some of his videos, and sometimes he does this just to be out front and get the clicks and all that stuff. But so people will listen to what he has to say. But for instance, he'll say things like, I'm not going to try to include the FUDs. I don't care about them. They don't matter. And why should I give a shit about them? I'm not going to do it. Or people who are like the sellouts or whatever, whatever word of the week he's using to call them, I don't care about those guys, because if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, and get off my lawn. And I don't run into that stuff as much on gun channels. People seem to be a little more, a little friendlier, and not quite so aggressive. That if you're not doing it my way, then you're doing it the wrong way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very much it. I mean, if you listen to like Cheryl Todd or Clover's really good at this. Charlie Cook, their messages are always really positive, and they don't really talk about there's the negative shit. But I think sometimes we go into that negative stuff, and sometimes we have to talk about it. But sometimes the best way is just to ignore all that and get back on message and get back on topic. But that could just be me.
Well, yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, sometimes I personally get sick of hearing that stuff. I mean, every once in a while, when I'm on a chat, especially if I've been drinking, and what I really think really starts coming out, I'll start saying stuff like, gun owners are basically delusional because they think they're the majority, and they're not. And people get really offended when I say stuff like that, when it's obviously just truthful, that if we were as big a community as everybody thought we were, we wouldn't be having these problems. The fact that we're especially where I live in Connecticut, I mean, we're the minority, and the only thing that saves us is the fact that we're a republic, and we got rights, and you're not supposed to step on them. But when people say, well, if only we could get all the gun owners to do this, or when only we could get all the gun owners to do that, and then I stand up and say, what are you, mental? I mean, there aren't that many of us, really, when you get right down to it. So it's you need a force multiplier. You need to say, well, if it's not all the gun owners, it's all the gun owners and all their friends and all the people on the fence, and yeah, then maybe you get where you want to go. But I don't. While I every once in a while I'll kill the chat thing and stuff like that. People don't come after me and say, well, freaking Cycle Camp, you goddamn anti-2A guy, get out of my room.
Well, apparently the truth hurts a little too much to some people.
Could you check your private messages? I'm going to. Just kidding. All right.
Well, but a lot of it too is not saying that, like, there's a lot of shows that are super fun and it's just people busting each other's balls. And I mean, and that we're mostly a group of dudes, and that's what dudes do. And I think that's a totally different thing that sometimes I think our message gets lost in how far off topic we get. But I mean, I'm guilty of it too, because sometimes some of the chats are just like hanging out in a bar and you go over every topic in the world, that some of them have very little to do with guns. But that's also the great part of gun channels, is talking to a bunch of people about varying different things. But maybe clean up our message a little bit, maybe.
Clean up how?
Yeah, it depends on what you're talking about, because on a Friday night, you're not building something on Friday night that's going out to try to influence somebody who's on the fence. You're just bullshitting on a Friday night. Even on a Tuesday afternoon or whatever, you might be, whatever, shooting the breeze. But if you're doing something, I suppose, that, title on it, like focusing in on people who are new or whatever, then yeah, But I think most people that are active in the live chats will, even the people that are active in the text chats, will tidy up when we're on topic or something.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't have a lot of real world experience dealing with, how do I put this? Dealing with folks that are part of their community that don't always have the community's best interests at heart. And I'll give you an example from the business world. We decided we wanted to have a big call center, a big technical call center. And we wanted to represent a lot of the different areas. And there was a guy that worked for one of the areas that was vehemently opposed to this. He didn't like the idea. He didn't want to do. But they forced us to put him on the management steering committee. And that guy sabotaged us at every turn. Every time we tried to get something done, this guy screwed us over. And those are the kind of people that I think, our pal, Mr. Marshall, talks about and says, you can't have people like that inside your community. If you got to push him out of the community because he's screwing you over all the time. So if you have a guy that's an obvious shill or obviously doesn't believe in what's going on, or says one thing to you, but then goes off and does something totally different. I agree. You need to get rid of those people. And then the people come and say, oh, but we should all be one big happy family, and we should find a way for those guys to all participate. It's like they don't want to participate; they want to screw us over. And so you've got that dichotomy going. And if you point out somebody and you say, here's the obvious stuff he's done that sabotages us and messes us up, he should be out of the community. You get some bleeding heart coming in here saying, oh no, we're all gun owners together, and every time we lose a guy, that cuts our effectiveness. Well, you can't really have it both ways. Those guys, what the hell was it? Shakespeare or whoever, talked about bringing the viper to your own breast, and it's that's the stuff that drives me nuts. So there are times when there are people that just don't act in the best interest of the community, and if they continually do it, and you need to exclude them from the community. I mean, that's the way it is.
Right, because it's not maybe there's the definition thing here, culture, community. Maybe I don't think something can be valid if it's completely open to everything. How can it have real value? In other words, if it's going to accept everything, because then you would accept the most horrible and useless that associates itself with the community, right? So a community has to have a set of standards or something, right, to like give it a definition, if nothing else. So I agree with you there that you can't just allow everybody, or when you allow everybody, at least, then you've lowered the value of the overall. So maybe a thing to do would be like define them. Like you can be in the gun culture all you want. Like you pick up a gun and you own it. Yeah, you're in the gun culture. I don't know if I'm using the right word, but then to be considered like a activist or in the community or some further definition, some subset of the overall bigger community, then again you have some standard. You don't just jump into a chat and derail it when there's an obvious goal or objective to the chat that's necessary for in this case the continuation of the piece, that the laws that keep our rights.
Yeah, I think yesterday's Pramod really said it right. He says he works with a lot of people who own a gun, or there was a family gun that was passed down, but they don't really care about 2A issues. And unfortunately, when you talk about, everybody talks about gun owners as if they're a monoblock, as if all gun owners think alike and act, or ought to think alike and act alike. And the point of fact is that there's the label gun owner it's like homeowner. You know what I mean? Right. Just because you're a homeowner, well, some people own little bitty houses, and some people own great big houses, but some people have swimming pools, and some people have big pieces of land, and some people have no land at all. And those people all have different things that they worry about, or things that pushes their buttons. And for everybody to just say, well, every homeowner ought to care about swimming pool laws, it's like, no, not me, man. I only own 1/10 of an acre, and you couldn't put a swimming pool on my yard if I wanted to. And no matter what you do, you're not going to get that guy to care.
That's a great point.
And just because there's a bunch of gun owners, that's one of the things I think people make the big mistake. They say everybody who owns a gun ought to be behind this, and it's like, why? If all you do is target shoot, or all you do is hunt, you're not going to care about 2A. You're not going to care if you don't conceal carry. You're not going to care about people's carry rights, because it doesn't affect you. It doesn't bother you. So I mean, I really think it's you have to kind of narrow your focus as to what your group really is. And if you're talking about people that are Second Amendment issues, personal responsibility, personal accountability, that kind of stuff. I mean, 2A doesn't even mean self-defense, right? I mean, we all understand that 2A doesn't have anything to do with self-defense. It has to do with tyrannical government and all that kind of good garbage. The self-defense thing was stuff that it was always assumed back in the day, because everybody had a firearm for self-defense from the indigenous characters that were running around. But
because nobody needed to question it because they took care of themselves.
It was assumed. I mean, the town I used to live in, there were still in the book a law in the books from the 1800s that said if you were above a certain age, you needed to carry a gun to church.
But now we have jerks that question everything, that want to take away what we have already. So, it has to be implied now because people want to just nitpick every little small detail.
Right, but my point was that when you say gun owners and you try to wrap yourself around that whole community, and then you say, why don't they all care about the Second Amendment? It's like, well, wait a minute, that's two different sets of people. People that care about there's people that care about the Second Amendment that don't own a gun. And there's people that own 100 guns that don't give a shit about the Second Amendment. It's not the same group of people. And yet we always talk about, well, there's 300 million gun owners in this country and they ought to all come together. It's like, well, okay, you can say that, but I think you're sort of delusional a little bit.
You'd be lucky to get 1 million to actually do anything.
Well, 3%, right?
Right.
The War for Independence, it was 3% of the people in what was then the colonies rose up against those guys. Most of the other people, a vast majority of them, including George Washington, didn't really want to go to war with King George. They wanted to work it out. And so, but we're not all going to be running in the streets. At least I don't think so. I don't think we're going to be running in the streets anytime real soon.
No, I don't think anybody's going to be running in the streets. That's why we have cars and motorcycles now.
But that's where I was coming at was that at least at gun channels, most of the people in gun channels, a lot of them enjoy the gun sports. A lot of them enjoy the gun lifestyle, if you can call it that. A lot of them are concealed carry people that do competitive shooting and all that. But that's again. You're looking at a very shallow pool here. And so that's why we have to be kind of careful because everybody thinks that everybody ought to think the way they think, right? I mean, that's the whole problem we have with progressives and stuff, right? Is because they think that the state should force you to think the way I think, or at least act the way I think you ought to act. And we do. It's nice to be able to come to gun channels and not have to worry about that quite so much because people actually do think a lot alike. And I find that an advantage. I like that a lot.
But remember, just because we're on gun channels doesn't mean we agree on everything 100%. We still have our conflicting opinions, our conflicting conversations. We still have different views. So, but the one thing you will find is that almost all of us on gun channels support the Second Amendment.
Well, I don't think that's true either. I don't think all the people on gun channels support the true meaning of the Second Amendment. I think a lot of them think the Second Amendment is just concealed carry and that kind of stuff, constitutional carry and crap like that.
Well, thank you for ruining it. Thank you.
Well, I'm just saying I disagree with you, right? That's the whole point. But we can do that, and we don't have to walk away. I've had some really bad run-ins with Yankee on gun channels, but I still respect the man, and I think he has a lot of good things to say, and I still watch all his videos. And I think I think that sort of defines the gun channels guy a little bit. Most of the people in gun channels guys, even if they disagree with you, they're willing to come back around and have that argument again or have that conversation again. I mean, it seems to me anyway that most of the people that I've run into on gun channels, if you disagree with them, it doesn't get to the point like G was talking about earlier, where, well, I won't even be on a panel with that guy because he just pisses me off so bad. Now, there are guys that use really rough language on the panels, and a couple of those guys I don't really want to be on a panel with because I don't want to be listening to the F-bomb every 5 minutes. But when it comes to how they look at disagreement, I think that disagreement gets handled pretty well, and a lot of that is because the moderators are really good moderators.
Exactly.
I wanted to throw out there one thing that's awesome about gun channels. Somebody that lives in a mostly blue state and is surrounded by liberals all day, every day. It's been really refreshing to be around people that are pro 2A, that understand it's about tyrannical government, that understand some of these issues, because quite honestly, in my day to day, I don't meet a lot of that. And it's kind of like, I'm coming out of the closet a little bit, that, I don't get to run around, and I'm not in a state where it's assumed everybody's got a firearm. People find out you're the gun guy and they're kind of like, you have guns? What the hell is that? And it's been nice to be around a community of people that are largely the same. So there's a lot of really great stuff that, we get frustrated sometimes, but we're also pretty awesome too.
Yeah, I will admit that one of the reasons I come to gun channels is because I live in Connecticut, and I get so incredibly frustrated with the fact, again, like you said, I'm surrounded by blues, and they think the assault weapons ban was just a first step in the right direction and all that stuff, and they don't believe the stuff they're doing is unconstitutional because they own the state circuit courts, and they own the state Supreme Court, and the circuit court just backs them up, and the frickin' SCOTUS won't take our cases. And it's nice to come to gun channels and talk to people that believe sort of the same way, and at least empathize, with what we're going through. And I think that's really important. I mean, sometimes we get laughed at by some of the good red states. They kind of, sorry you live, behind enemy lines and all that. But even that makes it makes you feel a little better. I'll give you an example. I mean, when I was giving testimony, because of a comment I just saw on Guy That Comments, there was a guy that we were talking about, the stop and show your papers law that they want to pass.
Oh.
And there was the chief of police of Bridgeport said that people with guns are inherently more dangerous than other people,
including his entire department.
Well, yeah, but can you imagine how offensive that was to those of us who are legal concealed carry holders, and also because we can also open carry in Connecticut. Nobody does, but you can. And what he said was so incredibly offensive to us that it was difficult not to come flying right out of the chair. And this is the local, what do you call it? This is the local, he's the head of Bridgeport. Well, Bridgeport is it's one of the great big democratic welfare cities here in Connecticut. And so, of course, he's going to say stuff like that because the people he runs into with guns in Bridgeport are all freaking criminals. So I understand his point of view and why he thinks that way. But that's but to say stuff like that, again, the studies that show that concealed carriers are more, what do you call it? They perpetrate less crime even than cops do. So it's just absolutely amazing the stuff we go through here. But it's nice to be able to talk about stuff like that, and know you're going to have a sympathetic ear when you want to cry in your cups a little bit and do the whine thing.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, yep. But yeah, that study that you're talking about, we're the concealed carry holders, which it's part of it, but not what the 2A is about. I get that. But we're the most law-abiding citizens on the planet. Like, by far. Like, we commit very few crimes ever. More than cops, more than any other group there is.
Can you imagine what our world would be like if organized crime was free, at least from any lethal consequence, from any legal lethal consequence, to being, doing whatever unscrupulous thing they might want to do in one of the most wealthy countries on the planet. and what that individual, organized like, a bunch of thugs are going to figure out, hey, we can drive over to XYZ and they're not legally able to defend themselves lethally. So we should be able to go in there with sticks with a nail on it and, grab whatever we want out of there. So what that demoralizing, destabilizing effect would be on the greater country.
They'd literally be running the country.
Well, there would be a bunch of little situations happening that can't happen now because there's that, there's a reason for that to not happen. It can't grow when the conditions are not appropriate for it. When they, have their way and remove that aspect of gun ownership from, crime or whatever, that relationship between crime and gun owners, they do all these like, oh, it could save just one life. Do they do any amount of effort? Is there any responsibility on their end to look at all the consequences of a change like that? I mean, I'm asking you guys. I don't know if anybody, I guess what I should be saying, has anybody ever seen anything that actually looked at that aspect of the consequences?
Well,
no, and the first thing they say, you say, well, there's one study that estimates up to 2 million people a year, use handguns, successfully in self-defense. And the first thing they say is that study is a piece of shit and it doesn't mean anything. And that's the problem, because when you can't attack the data, you attack the source. And it's very difficult, dealing with folks like this. I mean, we just had a there was a Facebook thing that went up not too long ago that one of my carry organizations put up that talked about, hey, it's really not true that gun control has helped with mass murders in other countries. And man, I'm telling you, the trolls were in there. They were just kicking the shit out of that. And one of them had the balls to actually say that per capita, America had the highest murder rate of all the countries. Well, I know that's not true. I've seen independent studies that put us down like around 200. If you count the all the countries, not just the advanced, if you don't cherry pick your countries and all that stuff. But if you were to say that, they would say, oh, that's all bullshit. I don't believe any of it. So the reasons you never win with statistics with these guys is because they're emotion driven and not data driven. And if you put data on a table that contradicts what they're feeling emotional about, they just poo-poo the data and keep right on going. So you literally are wasting your time. That's why when people say, well, what do you do with a hardline anti-gun guy? The first thing I say is I turn around and walk away. Because I know that guy's got a cast iron skull, and the real data is not going to make any difference to him. So why waste my time? I want to talk to people that are on the fence or haven't formed an opinion or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at, because if you're in a group of people and there's other people that are more the on the fence people, which are generally, I think, should be the people we're going after the most, is if you're staying with the data and you don't get emotional, they walk away with at least, that was a reasonable idea. The other people were just kind of a crackpot.
Well, see, in the old days, when you used to have a debate, the guy that got mad first lost. Just by definition. If you could get the other guy to get mad and lose his temper, you won the debate. Now, it's just the opposite. It's who can pull the heartstrings of the audience the hardest. So it doesn't make any difference if you have data on your side or you have good arguments on your side. It really comes down to who's the better sophist, who can pull the heartstrings of the people in the audience. And that's one of the difficulties that we have as conservatives, and gun owners tend to be conservatives. There doesn't always. I know that's a gross generalization, but that doesn't mean. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because I saw a comment in the chat.
I don't agree. You're ignoring the libertarians.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that sometime too, right? Why don't they just call themselves anarchists and get it over with?
So I guess you guys were talking about having a discussion with the diehard, like you say, steel-headed, not going to change their mind person. I think Woods was saying if you do that in a setting where the bystanders might appreciate the interaction or something, or gain something from it, or you leave the bystanders with something.
Right, and the difficulty with that is the guy that you're up against is going to use personal attacks. He's going to venalize you, right? He's going to make it sound like you're the freaking devil, and it's very difficult to just stick with the facts under those circumstances.
I agree with you. Now, so I just wanted you to be able to, I think that got you to where you were and concluding what your thought was, right? So, okay, so I don't disagree with either one of you, but I don't think that's our only option or our only conclusion to it. So, first off, I think humor and you said something about appeal to their emotions, and that's obviously, I mean, we know that they appeal to emotions more than anything. But if that's some sort of an emotional thing, is there a way to douse water on that, or to pour water on it so that you since they're resting the whole thing on an assumption of emotions, right? An assumption of circumstances, not using facts, I guess, but either humor or some sort of insight to just attack, or at least defeat, maybe is the better word, their whatever it might be. And I think that Woods and I and Smeggy have in the past had discussions on like the idea of having like some battery or arsenal, right? Some magazine, I'm trying to use our words, an inventory of comebacks or like ways to defeat. So I hear what you're saying, like facts, like, well, here's the facts about that. Here's the real statistics, or you're using numbers that include, too broad of a data set. Those kind of things aren't going to work and appeal to emotion. But if they're like blah, 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 or something, and I'm just saying something off the cuff here, but like, well, I'm no murderer, but I don't want Trump to own all the guns. Like just a quick parry that allows us to get a point across and to defeat their because what my fear is if we get self-defeatist and we say there's no way to attack there's no way to defend this attack that they've got, then what happens is there is no defense in the attack, and then their perception is that there is no defense, that they're correct. So I want to have something in our arsenal. I want to use our words again, something in our arsenal that we have at our disposal, a tool in our toolbox that we can use to potentially throw water on their little song and dance that they're doing there.
I love the idea of using humor, but I mean, it would be a case by case basis, and I can't tell you like what joke to use. Yeah, but I totally agree with that. That like you're very lighthearted, but they're very serious, and it's the end of the world. And you're more lighthearted, and people when they're watching that, they don't want to watch the person that's super serious all the time. Oh my God. And you're like, well, I hear what you're saying. I think Haas is really good at that, where you just ask a lot of questions to break down their theory. And you're like, so what you're saying is,
Well, and basically one of the best ways to do this is to continue asking questions to try to get them to refine their point and then lead them down the garden path. And when you finally get to the point where you say, okay, so you don't believe anybody that's tyrannical should have guns, but the only people you want to have guns are the police and the military and the government. Do I understand you correctly? And,
exactly.
And now you put them on the defensive and you get them to backpedal. Humor is a very difficult thing to use. Personally, I think humor is a very difficult thing to use to diffuse this kind of a situation, because it's one of those when you're having a discussion like this, and I won't call it an argument, but when you're having a discussion like this, the trying to inject humor into it makes you sound shallow and flippant. Most of the time, they can turn that on you so easy that it's very difficult. But if you do the thing, the right way to do it is not argue your point, but to help dissect their point. Like Louder with Crowder, right?
Right.
Crowder he will drop a couple truth bombs in there about, are you aware of this study? Are you aware of the statistic? And the person isn't. And if they're not, he says, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about what you're saying. And he leads them around to like some natural conclusions to the way they're thinking. And then they get all tied up in their underwear, and then they get mad and lose their temper.
But he also definitely uses humor.
He does, but
he's a comedian.
You know, he's trained at it. And that's what I'm saying. Us average people aren't used to doing this kind of stuff. But again, your average guy is not on a debate team. Your average guy has never stood up in front of a group of, 1,000 people and given a speech. And these individual encounters, it requires a little bit of skill and a little bit of training. And that's one of the things that you get from talking to each other, here, you get some ideas on how you might approach stuff like that. But let's remember that not everybody, I personally do not put my gun views on Facebook, because that's not what I think Facebook is for. I think Facebook is cat pictures and family. And it's not for me to have diatribes and have trolls coming after me, because it literally bothers me. If somebody makes a really stupid comment or says something really rotten about me on Facebook, that bothers me. I go to bed thinking about that and stuff like that, and I just don't want to do it. With the exception of some of the chat rooms that I'm in, like for my Second Amendment stuff. And this becomes, there becomes a point in time where you just become the guy who only ever wants to talk about the Second Amendment, or you just become the guy who always wants to defend the AR-15. And once that happens, you're done. In your social community, once you become that guy, you're pretty much done, because now they have a preconceived notion of what you're going to say and what kind of things you're going to talk about, and they're just going to tune you right out.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that on Facebook. About 2 months ago, I just quit doing anything 2A related because I was getting into too many quagmires with people.
If somebody says something that's obviously just 100% wrong, I will sometimes make a comment, and I will point him to a source where he can get educated a little bit. But most of the time, they turn right around. They don't go to the source. They don't read anything they say. They just say, no, you're wrong. And it's okay, fine. And then you walk away. So anyway.
And Nice Strike walked away.
Well, it is 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah. Well, so we've had a discussion. That Dead Horse has been silent. I don't know if he's just doing stuff.
No, I'm just listening. I'm here.
Anything to throw in there before we start winding it up?
I have something that I can relate it to that I've seen with my own eyes throughout my life. Throughout my life, I've seen the motorcycle community come under attack and start to be discriminated against. And, and I'm talking even when I was young, right? Because I come from like a family, like motorcycle guys, right? And so not only in my life, but like my father's life and stuff, I've seen that, the discrimination and become more and more under attack and lose some of their rights and stuff like that. And a lot of these groups were, if the side of your tank doesn't say Harley on it, you can't be in our club. You can't ride with us. Or, or if you don't have an enduro, you can't ride with us, or a cafe racer or whatever, and they were all separated. And then in my lifetime, I've seen pretty much all these groups drop that defense of each other and stop the discrimination against each other and join together and to fight and save their rights in the motorcycle community. And now there's Hondas riding with Harleys, right? And it's a common thing. Like, some of the younger people might not even know what I'm talking about, but that was a very, very real thing in the 70s, 80s, even in early 90s. And really, it was the leaders of these big organizations dropping their guard and starting to work with each other, that brought everything together, and that saved a lot of our rights, and stopped the discrimination. And yeah, and I think that the gun community could learn a lot from their example on how they did that. Because I see basically granted it's different, but I see a lot of the same thing going on in the gun community. Not only discrimination between each other, but being attacked from a powerful outside force constantly threatening our rights. I see us in the same situation. And the motorcycle community got over it. And if they can, I think we can.
So what's our Honda versus Harley in the gun community?
Oh, 1911 versus Glock. Come on.
FUDs versus everybody else.
Just pick two, independent subsets, right? So competition versus hunters versus tactical versus CCW versus investment versus recreational shooters versus
training,
Second Amendment advocates. I mean, there's certainly overlap, but there's definitely people that just jump in, and certainly free to do so. I mean, I think it's unreasonable. I mean, Psycho was saying that before. I mean, started the whole thing when I started getting into this whole topic with being unrealistic, unreasonable, or whatever about getting everybody on board. But I mean, what the hell do we ever need anybody on board for? Because unless we're trying to be Democrats suggesting 97% of people will agree on anything, 97% of people are going to not do anything. Let's admit that. Let's acknowledge that. Let's deal with that, because we only need those 3% like you're talking about. We seriously only need 3% to be active. So, I mean, it can be discouraging. There's lots of things that could be done better in a perfect world where somebody's playing the game of Risk and you have control of all the resources. Yeah, we'd use our resources differently, but we don't need to. That's not our only option. We can each put forth effort. We can each grab a camera. We can each go into the gun shop. Every time I go into a gun shop, which we're going into whenever we do anyway. I'm not suggesting you have to go to a gun shop every day. I'm just saying once in a while when you go in a gun shop, remember you have a camera in your pocket and ask them. I've only had, in my experience, 10% of gun shops, and that's pretty much dead on, 10% say, no, I'd rather you not take pictures. That means 9 out of 10 gun shops I walk into, I go, can I take some pictures for the internet? Or I just say, can I take some pictures of your shop? I would say maybe 40% say, what for? And then I say, for the internet. And they go, okay. Very few, 5 out of all the gun shops, hundreds of gun shops I visited, 10 maybe have asked me more than, oh, for the internet. Okay. They don't care. As long as you don't answer them with because I'm going to do a hit piece on you in the local newspaper, then they don't care. They understand what the internet is. Just acknowledge that, be aware of that. If everyone were able to do that occasionally, you don't have to run around beating everybody over the head every time they, misspeak or something, or they're crazy about something. Just put some effort out there, and we create little points of data on the internet that influence all kinds of stuff. We exercise the tools and the skill sets that allow us to really emphasize things that are important when they're necessary. And we, by doing this stuff, we encourage and we influence others in their ability to do stuff. And I can tell you, I've talked to everybody from people that get discouraged and say, "Aw, shucks," and begrudgingly do a little bit of stuff, to people that are just influential and moving and shaking and have just amazing resources and reach and influence. And, there's very little difference between that extreme as far as the human beings involved. So everybody's effort, most of the tremendous effort out there, I have said it a million times, is done by people that are just regular persons saying, frustrated, like, oh, it's not happening the way I want. This shouldn't be this way. And then they just do a little something. And then we live in a world where that's your little something is able to be magnified and shared, and all of our efforts, and again, learning those skills and utilizing them and practicing them, allow that to happen and create an incubator for the next great idea that's going to come along. I'm going to end it at this point. thank the 15 people who've been consistently watching tonight, even if 4 of them are us. I think the 11 people that are out there, 6 of you used the internet and gave us a thumb up. 5 of you either didn't give a shit about this show, what we're talking about, or didn't bother to reach over and click that little thumb. I don't care. But hopefully when you do other things in the future on the internet, you remember you're using the internet. Thanks, guys, for jumping in and being part of the conversation. We'll be back tomorrow. Oh, there's also a workshop tomorrow. It's also Every Second Matters. So we'll be kicking the shit out of that tomorrow. I've been efforting on the book site there to learn how to do stuff that I'm going to put into effect with the Second Amendment advocates, researchers, authors, and others, so that we all can at least have another resource out there. Anybody else who comes along and tries to figure out who is out there doing what to help answer some of those questions, or create a Wikipedia of sorts that allows people to know what's come before us, what's worked, what hasn't, the attacks that have come, the waves of anti-Second Amendment, whatnot. And we're going to be working on that pretty much all day. I think I'm going to go get something to eat in the morning, and I'm going to go live, and I'm going to link shame and encourage as many of the people I know in the 2A media to get on board. We only have 5 months left before the Gun Rights Policy Conference happens in September 20th in Phoenix, Arizona, in which case that'll be our last opportunity to come together as a group of Second Amendment advocates at a national level and get ready for 2020, which may or may not be an important year, may not be pivotal. I don't really care. But if we don't get together on one of these cycles and learn, cycle camp again, one of these election cycles, one of these political cycles, and show our influence, show our skills, show our ability to use the tools that are available to us, then we'll never change this cycle. We'll never change these patterns. So be part of the influence of these, be part of our shows, be part of the other people that are out there efforting. And thanks for watching.